So welcome all and good afternoon in this pre or post lunch session, whatever it is for the delegates across India and across the globe. So this session is basically the glaucoma diagnostic kit, mainly focusing on the clinical diagnostic tools versus the imaging tools, and which cause a lot of dilemma of selection among them. Glaucoma, we all know, is a multifactorial disease. You know, there are lots of mechanical, vascular, neurotropic factors involved, and the diagnostic armamentarium is equally multifactorial. We have lots of innovations happening in glaucoma day in and day out, and lots of technology spurring up every few months and every years. But still, a recurrent dilemma always continues to exist as to which diagnostic tool would be suitable for your patient. And because each glaucoma patient is unique and each eye of a patient is individual and different and it is unique, and therefore it requires an individual diagnostic algorithm to be followed for those patients and those eyes. So this session basically focuses on discussion of the merits and demerits of these currently available tools, and with their side by side comparison, mainly focusing on, as I said, the clinical tools versus the technical and technological tools. So it would help you to make clear decisions for diagnosis, and you know for which patient which investigation you need to advise or you need to perform. So in this session, we have the following talks. Dr. Talveer would be talking on the era of in the era of imaging. Does gonioscopy have a place? This would be followed by a talk on UBM, its role in open angle glaucoma by Dr. Neha. Anterior segment OCT, where does it stand on the diagnostic ladder by Dr. Mayuri Kamar. Then myself would be talking on gonioscopy or imaging in angle closure glaucomas. Dr. Gunjan would be highlighting the disc evaluation, clinician based or technician based. And finally, Dr. Parul talking on a matter of preference, GDX or OCT. And at the end, we would have some panel discussion and take home pearls for all the attending delegates. So with that, any more ado, I request Dr. Talveer to begin her presentation on gonioscopy. Dr. Talveer is an alumni of the RP Center AIMS, and she is currently the assistant professor at the Government Medical College, Patiala. Over to you, Dr. Talveer.
Ma'am, is my screen visible?
Not yet.
Yes, we can see you. Could you start sharing?
Yeah, yes. It's now visible. You can just make it full screen.
Okay. Thank you so much, ma'am. Now, my talk is on the role of gonioscopy in the era of imaging. So we all know that gonioscopy is the gold standard for angle viewing still now. And it gives us a direct view of the angle. Once you put in a 2-mirror or a 4-mirror gonioscope in the eye of a patient while the patient is sitting on the slit lamp, you will be able to visualize the angle in around 1 to 2 minutes. That's the amount it takes once you have surpassed the learning curve that is required to do a gonioscopy. And when you talk about imaging, the imaging actually, whether it is a UBM or an ASOCT, the UBM or ASOCT, it gives us a cross-sectional image of the angle at one point of time. At one point of time of the angle that we are viewing. Sometimes we are able to get very high resolution images also. So this is a video. On the right hand side is actually a video. Just a minute. This is a video of the KSIA OCT, which is actually a 360-degree angle viewing OCT, which we have nowadays. And this is a patient where there was a dip in the angle structures. And while we actually did gonioscopy, there was a foreign body which was lodged in the angle because the patient had a hammer chisel injury. So gonioscopy helps us to view the angle directly, and we are able to see all the pathologies inside the angle. Then if we talk about what is the important landmark while we do gonioscopy or while we do the imaging, scleral spur is a very important landmark. But in various studies, it has been shown that in imaging, the scleral spur, which is a point where the ciliary body attaches itself to the inside of the sclera, this might not be visible in up to 30% of the patients, especially in angle closure glaucomas. And it's very important that once you do imaging, if you do not know where the scleral spur is, then the quantifying any image it becomes very difficult when you have done some imaging. While on gonioscopy, also the scleral spur is usually visible unless it is a angle closure or there is a iridotrabecular contact that is actually present in the angle. Then also, because the only marker in imaging is your scleral spur, but once you're doing gonioscopy, we have an additional marker that is called the corneal wedge technique. In angles where you are not able to see the trabecular meshwork because there is no pigmentation either in a young patient or the one or more quadrant of angle closure are picked up more on ASOCT. This might also be due to illumination that is required while doing gonioscopy. Then we have also come up with the exact parameters which are associated with development of acute angle closure or angle closure glaucomas. Also, in recent articles, it has been told that ASOCT can actually predict the incidence of gonioscopic angle closure. Why? Because ASOCT tends to pick up angle closure earlier, but it does not actually have any benefit in terms of managing the patients, because if you are picking up patients before they even develop the primary angle closure suspect, even then in 90% of the patients, we will not be doing YAG-PIs in those people. Also, we have divided angle closure suspect and angle closure glaucoma into categories based on the imaging, but this imaging, it only tells us what is the exact mechanism of angle closure, and according to that mechanism, especially people who have large iris areas, they can undergo laser iridoplasty. So if we have to talk about it, in angle closure, the imaging, it tells us exact mechanism of why angle closure is happening, but gonioscopy mostly in 90% of people gives us that information. When we talk about photopic and scotopic imaging, the imaging in gonioscopy is much more precise, although photopic and scotopic imaging is also done on imaging on ASOCT also, which also tells us that the angle opening and closing is much more in normal patients than chronic angle closure glaucoma. But indentation is actually when we have to differentiate between synechial versus appositional angle closure, that cannot be done on imaging. Although nowadays deep learning softwares have come up to look at angle closure assessment in terms of bright or dark illumination conditions, but we have still not developed how we can do indentation on imaging. In open angles also, there are conditions which cannot be picked up on imaging, for example, pigmentary glaucomas. Then we have angle recession glaucoma, although angle recession can be picked up on imaging when you look at if the iris has moved way behind the scleral spur. But what about people who normally have a very wide ciliary body band, or iris is inserted anteriorly or away from the scleral spur? In those people, we will not be able to differentiate unless gonioscopy is done. Also, some patients, they will have, like on the left hand side, the white arrows, they show patchy angle recession. So this cannot be picked up essentially on imaging. This is a picture of an open angle of a patient who had CRVO and has a lot of vessels in the angle. Similarly, here so it's very essential to learn gonioscopy and have a good grip on it. Selective laser trabeculoplasty also requires gonioscopy. Sometimes post-operative evaluation also requires gonioscopy. But imaging has a clear advantage on people who have corneal opacities, where we cannot assess the angle with the help of gonioscopy. So the role of imaging and the role of gonioscopy are actually different when it comes to ophthalmology. I would like to say and conclude that we cannot compare gonioscopy to imaging, because gonioscopy is a procedure which is widely available. You just have to buy a gonioscope which you like. It would be a 2-mirror gonioscope where you need to put coupling fluid, or it could be a 4-mirror gonioscope where you do not need coupling fluid. And the learning curve is almost similar in both. And it is cheaper because everybody has a slit lamp. While the patient has come to you and is sitting on the slit lamp, it hardly takes 1 extra minute to do gonioscopy. While for imaging, the patient has to be shifted on a different machine. It sometimes takes more time, especially if you have to do UBM. And imaging is actually an adjunct to those patients who we cannot explain while we are doing our slit lamp examination, and where we think that there is a different mechanism for glaucoma. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Talveer. That was a very beautiful pictorial presentation, and it's not surprising that you are the author of a video atlas of gonioscopy.
Thank you.
With that, we move on to the next presentation. It's by Dr. Neha, and she'll be talking on UBM, its role in open angle glaucoma. Over to you, Dr. Neha.
Pardon me, I guess there is some 1 second. Yeah.
And while you start the screen sharing, I'll just introduce Dr. Neha. She is the director and consultant of the Advanced Eye Care and Glaucoma Services and the TetraView Super Specialty Eye Center at Delhi.
Pardon me 1 second. It's taking longer than usual. Yeah. Okay, so I'll be talking about the role of UBM in open angle glaucoma.
Please unmute yourself.
So I think, there is a problem. I'm logged in with 2 devices. Am I audible? Okay, 1 second.
I would request you to please leave, exit from one device, otherwise it will create echo.
1 second.
Or you can put one device on totally
Mute.
zero sound or mute. Yeah. Try speaking something, Dr. Neha.
Yeah. Am I audible now?
No, just try and reduce the entire volume of another device that you're logged in from. Where we can't see your picture, just try. Are you there from your phone, or it is a laptop only? We can't hear you, Dr. Neha. Could you please unmute yourself? Yeah. I would request you from another device, I would request you to totally reduce the volume, make it 0.
Am I audible now?
You're audible, but the echo is still there.
Echo is still there. Otherwise, keep another device little far away from you.
Okay. Is it fine now?
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay, sorry. Okay, so UBM is extremely valuable imaging technique for detailed examination of the anterior segment. When we're talking about structures like ciliary body, zonules, anterior chamber angle, iris, and especially the interrelationship between these structures. So the UBM is an extremely important tool. And this importance becomes all the more when the cornea is hazy and the gonioscopy cannot be done. So UBM, it not only tells us that how the angle is, whether it is an open angle or an closed angle, but at the same time, it also allows us to see the interrelationship between these structures. So, and also the edge of UBM over ASOCT being that it allows visualization of the structures behind the iris also. So when we talk about the structures in UBM, as Dr. Talveer has already mentioned, scleral spur remains to be the most important landmark, which can be easily identified where these radiolucent shadows of the cornea merge with the radio-opaque shadows of the sclera. So this here where we mark is the scleral spur. So what are the various measurements that we can take in on UBM? One is being the angle opening distance. So how do we measure that? So 500 microns anterior to the scleral spur, we draw perpendicular on the iris, and this line, this distance is the angle opening distance. Then talking about the trabecular iris angle. So this angle is with its apex at the iris recess and the 2 points crossing the points of the angle opening distance. Third important measurement can be the trabeculociliary processes distance. What is this? So again, 500 microns from the scleral spur, and then draw a straight line bisecting through the iris up to the ciliary processes. Then next come the angle recess area. So 750 microns from the iris, from the scleral spur. Again, we draw perpendicular to the iris. So this triangular area that forms is known as the angle recess area. Next, we move to the other some angle parameters includes the iris thickness along the TCPD line, iris thickness 2 millimeters from the iris recess, and then iris thickness at the level of pupillary margin. Also, we can measure the iris ciliary processes distance and the iris and zonular distances. So these distances are basically, they help us classify the how close is the ciliary body, whether it is anteriorly rotated or not, whether we are looking at an open angle or a closed angle. So we all know that UBM has been characteristically used for angle closure disease, plateau iris, iris cyst, but its utility in open angle glaucoma is less known and less understood. So it's for a fact that the UBM is an important research tool, and the mechanisms of rise in IOP in open angle glaucoma or angle closure glaucoma are continue to evolve, and it is an ever learning process. So for example, in this study, they found that when the choroidal thickness is measured 4 millimeter from the iris root, the anterior choroid, they found that the thickness was higher in both POAG and PACD compared to the healthy controls. So similar to this, UBM will always be an extremely important research tool in better understanding of glaucoma pathogenesis. So the one open angle glaucoma that shows extremely characteristic findings on UBM is the pigment dispersion syndrome, where what we would see is a widely open angle with concave iris configuration, bowing of the iris posteriorly with iridozonular and iridolenticular contact. And again, UBM will also help us to assess in the efficacy of peripheral iridotomy. So here we see when the PI was done, this concavity has been relieved. The reverse pupillary block is now relieved, equalizing the pressure between the anterior and the posterior chamber. However, it is postulated that PI is particularly useful in those cases where the iridozonular contact is significant. So next, coming on to the role of UBM in post-traumatic glaucoma. Again, Dr. Talveer had highlighted this, but I would like to emphasize, especially in cases where there is total hyphema and we plan a surgery, so we need to know beforehand that what are we heading for. So the UBM will help us in identifying iridodialysis. It will help us in identifying angle recession, which can be identified by widening of ciliary body band as the iris, the insertion of the iris on sclera shifts posteriorly. It will also help us to know the extent of blood clots in the anterior chamber. It will help us to see if there is any ciliary body detachment. So here, as we can see, the ciliary body has completely detached from the sclera, and the anterior chamber has become continuous with the supraciliary space. Also, it will help us to assess the zonular status, and we would know beforehand if there is any post-traumatic subluxation of the lens. Moving on to the role of UBM in pseudo-exfoliation. So what we are expecting is a deep anterior chamber, flat iris contour. The deposition of pseudo-exfoliative matter can be seen, but most important role here it would be in cases of PECs where the pupil is small and does not dilate. So the assessment of zonules become difficult. So in these cases, the broken zonules will be visible as small zonular remnants attached to the lens capsule. In pseudophakic glaucoma, so it's not uncommon that we have seen patients after cataract surgery sometimes present with recurrent uveitis or recurrent hyphemas. So the pathology of that can be looked into by UBM. So for example, in this case, we can see the IOL is tilted and one end of the optic of the lens is rubbing with the posterior surface of the iris, which was giving rise to recurrent uveitis. So these kind of IOL tilts can be picked up by UBM. Also, in cases with pseudophakic bullous keratopathy, where gonioscopy does not allow us, cannot be done, so we can visualize the angle structures with UBM. Coming to post-PK glaucoma, so in these cases, it will help us to see what is the IOL position. It will also help us to determine that what is the kind of glaucoma we are looking at. Is the IOP high only because of peripheral anterior synechia or iridocorneal apposition, or maybe the angles are open and the IOP is high only because of the maybe steroid response. It will also help us in planning of the regrafts, and also it helps glaucoma surgeon to understand and to select the site of filtering surgery so that we can identify a point where there are minimum peripheral anterior synechia. In developmental glaucomas, UBM will show thin iris and poor, small atrophic ciliary body may be seen, especially in case of congenital glaucomas, where it will help us to know what surgery has been done before and what can be the subsequent management. In Sturge-Weber, supraciliary effusions of about 360-degree can be seen with wide open angles, thus proving the hypothesis that the cause of raised IOP is raised episcleral venous pressure. In post-trabeculectomy cases, UBM can help us to see whether the sclerostomy site is open or it is blocked internally by blood clot or by iris. It also helps us in grading of the filtering blebs. So L-type blebs, which are low reflectivity blebs, are usually associated with lower and good control of IOP, whereas these kind of blebs, F-type, are flat blebs, hyper-reflective. They are usually associated with poor control of IOP. Again, in non-penetrating deep sclerectomy, what we can see is the extent of intrascleral lake. We can visualize the trabeculodescent membrane. Collagen implants that are often used in trabeculectomy or non-penetrating deep sclerectomy, they can also be visualized with UBM and can also, we can also see the resolution or dissolution of these implants with time. When coming to tubes, again, the tubes, if they are occluded internally by iris or by fibrin clots, can be visualized with UBM. So my take-home message is that UBM is an extremely important clinical and research tool for understanding the pathomechanisms in primary and secondary open-angle glaucomas. They're very important for imaging in cases with corneal haze. The extent of iridozonular contact and efficacy of iridotomy in pigment dispersion, assessment of zonular status in PECs with polydilating pupils, post-traumatic glaucomas with hyphema, and functional assessment of glaucoma surgeries to look for a cause of rise in IOP post-operatively. Thank you. Sorry, my camera somehow doesn't seem to be working.
Thank you, Dr. Neha. That was a very elaborate talk on UBM. And in fact, UBM is a tool which is quite underutilized and underrated, but it has lots of advantages when you talk of glaucoma diagnostics. So with that, we move on to the third presentation by Dr. Mayuri Khamar on anterior segment OCT. Where does it stand on the diagnostic ladder? And Dr. Mayuri Madam needs absolutely no introduction. She has been my mentor and teacher, faculty at the MNJ RIO, and subsequently working as a consultant at the Raghudeep, and now a consultant at the Ocular Eye Care at Ahmedabad. Over to you, Madam. And yes, your slides are visible.
Can you hear me? Am I audible?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay.
If you could just move a little closer to the mic, it would be more audible.
Okay, okay, I will try to. So the talk given to me is anterior segment OCT. Where does it stand on the diagnostic ladder? My two previous speakers has covered a lot of aspects of the talk, but I will try to restrict myself only to the anterior segment OCT, where I use it and how to use it. It has been said that the gonioscopy, and I still believe it is an essential tool to be done for all the patients. It gives us subjective assessment and is prone to have a variability between the examiners and in the different conditions of the light. While imaging device provides more objective assessment of the antechamber angle, it has a greater sensitivity, particularly in the appositional angle closure, where you want to screen the large population. There are three modalities available for the anterior segment imaging. I will restrict myself to the anterior segment OCT, which is similar to the B scan ultrasound, but instead of light, it uses the sound in the tissue. And light beams are directed into the tissue, and reflections coming from different layers of this tissue are received by the detector and processed into the two-dimensional image. It gives us objective, precise, and very fast anterior segment imaging, and the resolution with the AS is excellent. And though the disadvantage is depth is always less, and this is the only technique which gives us angle-to-angle measurement also. Unlike gonioscopy, this is non-contact, non-skill dependent. Everyone can, any technician can perform it for you, and it gives objective measurement. And as I said in the beginning, it is minimally affected with the light artifact, and documentation is possible. Now, how to identify the scleral spur? So continue this area, the sclera, till you see the apex where it stops, and then the line moves on the cornea in that part of the trabecular meshwork. So this is the point where it is a scleral spur, and the clear zone that you see here posterior to it is a angle recess. It is not difficult with ASOCT to identify the scleral spur. A lot of data like iridocorneal tools and other softwares are available. The previous speaker has already covered about this, so I will not go into the detail. But yes, we can know how much is the angle opening distance at 500 micron or 750 micron. Angle recess area can be measured, as well as the trabecular iris surface functioning area can also be measured by using this software. Now I will go through various usefulness of the ASOCT in the glaucoma to know the extent and mechanism of angle closure glaucoma and to understand the physiological variation of the angle. So this is a typical case to show you the pupillary block glaucoma with the convex iris configuration, and you see the oppositional closure here. Another mechanism is the phacomorphic element. The lens has pushed iris into the angle, and there is an extremely shallow chamber. And the third mechanism shown here is the tabletop appearance of plateau iris configuration. With the gonioscopy, you have a learning phase, and it is difficult to identify. Everyone cannot identify plateau iris configuration with the gonioscopy. Another thing that has been now discussed a lot, why all the narrow angles are not developing. So the last roll of iris, which is prominent, is giving rise to the angle closure. So this is very nicely seen with ASOCT, and when there is exaggerated lens vault, that can also give rise to the angle closure glaucoma. Another thing, anterior part of this can be visualized by keeping the eyes on the sideways. So you can see the ciliary effusion here. So in acute angle closure glaucoma, uveal effusion, cells in the chamber, and shallowness of the anterior chamber with the large lens can be identified with ASOCT. Posterior pushing mechanism is nicely seen here as case of spherophakia. After dilatation, there is a deepening of the chamber, and there is no role of iridectomy in such posterior pushing mechanism. So everything nicely projected with the imaging technique. The pigmentary glaucoma is all over. It is giving rise to reverse pupillary block, and this helps us in identifying who will have a benefit of the laser PI in these patients. Now the physiological variation, now this is a case where you see there is an opening here, though it is a narrow angle, but with the lights on the pupil, small pupil, you can see a narrow angle, but it is still open. Now with the dark, you can see the dilatation of the pupil in the same patient, but there is a opposition. So by doing this, you can identify who is at the risk and who needs the laser iridectomy. So instead of doing dilatation test, this is the technique which helps you in identifying it immediately and without harassment of the angle closure acute attack. The next is iris volume and iris configuration and the assessment of the glaucoma in the opaque media, which is already been covered. I will just pass on without discussing this. lens rise tool is also available, which will give you certain amount of and the classification is available. So how much is the lens vault, which should give you the idea that by removing the lens, you can have a benefit in this particular patient. So oppositional angle closure, if seen in less than 5 degree, if you see the angle opening here, then laser iridectomy is must. If angle is 5 to 10 degree, then laser is recommended. If there is a high lens vault, then cataract extraction is indicated. Now, assessment of the procedural that you have done, for example, this myotic pupil of the pre-iridectomy status, extremely narrow chamber and close angle. Immediately after iridectomy, you can see the clear gush of the aqueous entering in through the chamber, and there is a deepening of the chamber as well as there is a opening of the angle, and you can measure what is the morphological change in the anterior chamber angles. And with the dense arcus, it is sometimes difficult to identify whether this is a iridectomy, which is patterned. There you can see the lens behind also with the ASOCT. And the blab in vivo internal analysis for the functionality is not that simple with the slit lamp examination, but we have done our study and published also that this is a helpful tool. You can look at the various blab wall morphology. Uniform reflectivity is a sign of the failure, while multifold reflectivity in the wall is a sign of the success. Now, multiform wall can have a 3 pattern, multiple internal layers, or the subconjunctival separations shown here, as well as microcystic areas, multiple cyst areas. And this is very typical of the MMC blabs. And the root beneath the scleral flap can also be identified in these cases. Now, this is a case who had a trap failure. Internal opening was patterned, but he had a fibrosis coming up, hyperdense area in this area, not showing any aqueous pockets. So what should we have done? So we remove the releasable suture in this particular patient. This is the pre-release picture, and you post-release, you can see the multiple aqueous coming up with the spongy appearance and multiple layers. So Ologen is another substitute nowadays. Lot of people are using it. So immediately after the surgery, early phase, you can see the aqueous pocket here and the dense area, homogeneous area of the Ologen is seen. After 4 months and 6 months, you can see of the blab. And there is the Ologen is almost disappearing, and aqueous pockets are now forming in this suprascleral space and large echoic area in this particular area. So at the end of 12 months, it is not a huge blab, but you have a multiple microcystic areas in the peri part of the blab and aqueous pockets just suprascleral. So this is how it is a safe blab. And the express, you can see the blab here as well as the position of the tube. And same thing can be applied with the tubes that Ahmed or the Adi. So usefulness of the AS is at a lot of areas which may not be possible with the gonioscopy. So this can be a good adjunct to our clinical ornaments. So it is helpful in giving us the various understanding of the mechanisms, extent of the closure. Physiological variation can be studied in vivo, and just lot of objective measurements. When you want to do some studies, this is of use. Thank you very much.
Thank you, madam, for that very relevant talk as always. And it's actually the utility of ASOCT in the post-surgical analysis and follow-up and management of patients is very important, because sometimes clinically and on the slit lamp, we feel that all is well. But when you actually do the imaging and see what underlies that bleb, it actually changes your entire management for that patient. With that, I'll be sharing my screen now, and I'll be talking on gonioscopy versus imaging. My talk will basically be a compilation and a combination of all that has been discussed till now, but mainly focusing on the component of angle closure glaucoma. So in angle closure glaucoma, what would I prefer, a gonioscopy or an imaging technique? Angle closure glaucoma is now emerging as a leading cause of blindness worldwide. And because of the acute and severe rise in IOP that it causes, it is more blinding than the primary open angle glaucoma. And it is responsible for most of the glaucoma blindness that is seen in Asia. Because of the same reason, it is very important to diagnose it much earlier than primary open angle glaucomas because of the blindness that it causes. And as is the theme of this session, we have a lot of tools which are important for diagnosis. We have to take the applanation tone of attention, we have to see the discs, we have to see the fields, we do imaging. And if that is all not enough to create a dilemma, just for the angle assessment itself, we have so many tools in hand with us. We have the gonioscopy, ASOCT, UBM, and also the other newer techniques that were just mentioned. And if we see, we would all agree that yes, man has moved from man himself to machine and technology and software. And so perhaps many of us would be saying, oh, let's skip gonioscopy and move on with the software-based technology. It gives so much information. And even we sitting here right now, we have moved on from a physical conference to a virtual software and Wi-Fi based technology. And precisely because that is the reason that when charts of people with glaucoma in a very large LA practice were analyzed, it was found that gonioscopy was documented only 50% of the time, which indicated that it was actually half the time it wasn't done. So why do people hesitate to do gonioscopy? We have heard its utility in various types and diagnosis of glaucoma. So why are still people hesitating to do gonioscopy? One is the technique related issues. It does require some amount of skill and experience. It is subjective. It is affected by the type of lens and technique that you're using. Being a contact procedure, it is uncomfortable for all, for the patient, of course, and also for the performing ophthalmologist. Time consuming to some extent. It cannot be done by a technician. And because of all these above reasons, it is not suitable for mass screenings. The interpretation by gonioscopy also has its own issues. There is inter and intra-observer variability, which is more with narrow angles. Because it is subjective, there is an inability to accurately document or compare structures longitudinally. We all do have our smartphones and CCTVs with us, but still we know that photographic gonio documentation is not so easy. There are various classifications in vogue, starting from the Spieth and Shees to the modified RP center. And there are indentation and light artifacts which are associated with gonioscopy. There are also specific cases, as we have just seen through the previous three presentations, where gonioscopy does not yield much information. For example, cloudy corneas. A case of acute angle closure or post-acute angle closure comes to you, the corneal edema still persists. So gonioscopy here will be of no use. So you want to do something else to see the angles underneath that cloudy cornea. You have done a PI well patent, you see the retro illumination and everything. But when you do the gonioscopy, you are still not sure how much the angles have opened up, or they actually have opened up or not. So again, here you need something else. A convex iris, occludable angles could be of various degrees. You do some intervention, you do a PI or whatever, and you do the gonioscopy. But again, what about the quantification? How do you measure your success? Has it opened from 0 degrees to 15 degrees or 15 to 45? How you measure and quantify your success of treatment? Then again, as just Mayur Madam has said, you have done a PI, but again, because of the dark Arcus analysis, you're not sure whether it's actually patent or not. So these are cases where gonioscopy actually falls behind. Plateau iris, it is responsible for 20% of the angle closure glaucomas, and pseudo plateau iris caused by iris cyst. It is the second common cause of angle closure in young patients. So whenever in gonioscopy you see that double hump sign or those humps and bumps, you always want to know what is there behind that hump and bump. And that is where these imaging techniques come into play, which give you more information. ASOCT, we have already heard from Madam. It gives true cross sections, objectivity is there, reproducibility is there. It gives precise quantitative measurements. Being a non-contact technique, it is very convenient for the patient and observer. And because these are software-based technologies, storage of data and transfer is easily possible. In the advances on the OCT, we also have the spectral domain OCT, which provides more resolution. We have the swept source OCT also, which gives a 3-dimensional 360-degree photographic-like view. So this is actually very, very useful for demonstration and education of the patients, especially when you want to convince them for a prophylactic PI. So you can actually show the angles and explain them the status of their angles and need for a PI. And now, just like the RedCam, you have the iCam also, which provides a true color photograph of the angle where you can see all the minuscule abnormalities also, like the goniosynechia, peripheral anterior synechia. In secondary angle closure, you can see the neovascularization, or you can even see the physiologic processes. Coming to the UBM, what is its added utility in angle closure? Whenever you see in gonioscopy this Mount Fuji or the volcano sign, you probably know that the lens might need extraction. So in this cases, doing a UBM will give you the lens volt and the lens thickness. So you might consider doing an early cataract extraction in these cases. Talking of plateau iris, here both gonioscopy and anterior segment OCT fall back because the ASOCT will not give you any image or a picture beyond the posterior surface of the iris. So here UBM has to be done, which will show you that typically anteriorly rotated ciliary body, which shows the pushing of the peripheral iris anteriorly and the closure of the angle. Similarly, in the pseudoplateau iris, when you do the UBM, you can see those cysts or tumors, or it could be ciliary body edema or any mass which is lying behind and causing that pseudoplateau iris appearance and causing angle closure. We have been talking a lot of quantification and biometry of the anterior segment. So why do we need all those measurements? Basically, it is to provide reproducible criteria and to document the change, either longitudinally or following your treatment. And as just discussed, eyes with primary angle closure glaucoma, they are found to have a thinner iris, shorter trabecular ciliary process distance, and narrow angles, with acute angle closure glaucoma having the narrowest angle recess of all. So what does this shorter TCPD mean? Shorter TCPD actually means that these angles are susceptible to occlusion and they may play a role in the development of peripheral anterior synechia. So perhaps these eyes may need more vigilant and close follow-up and even may need a prophylactic PI. Darkroom provocative test, we have already heard about this. So imaging technique is very useful when you can actually quantify the amount of closure that happens, and that can help you to decide whether this patient will need a prophylactic PI or not. Coming to the comparison, again, gonioscopy and UBM are very contact procedures and quite cumbersome. So all of us, in fact, we might not ourselves also like a gonio lens or a UBM probe put into our eyes. Whereas anterior segment OCT is a very sophisticated non-touch technique, which could be done by technicians also. But for the same reason, again, talking of ASOCT, would you rely on something which is done by a technician or an operator? Or would you like to rely on something which you see with your own eyes? That is in gonioscopy. All the technologies are software based. So again, the software update and all those issues are always there with these technologies. And considering the cost, you can no way compare the cost of a gonio lens with that of an OCT or a UBM. So after all said and done, gonioscopy, yes, it is time consuming, but if skilled and you just spare some time with interest, it will gradually take less than a minute to do it. With a 4-mirror, 6-mirror lens, you can do a very quick 360-degree assessment of the angle width, both with and without indentation. Whereas you need to remember that with the imaging technique, you will only measure a tiny fraction of the angle at one point of time. And all those subtle findings, which are very important for diagnosis and classification of PACD, that is goniosynechia, PAS, TM pigmentation, all those are seen only in gonioscopy, not in the imaging techniques. And in secondary angle closure also, presence of neovascularization can be done with gonioscopy. ASOCT, yes, it detects more angle closure than gonioscopy, but what does that clinically translate to? It just shows that you're going to do more of PIs. So perhaps a patient who does not actually need a PI might end up getting a PI. Plateau and pseudoplateau iris, already mentioned that ASOCT is just equivalent to gonio. It will not give you any additional information. UBM is the tool to go for these cases. Quantification, yes, it is very much available with the imaging techniques, but you have to remember that all the measurements are ultimately dependent on the location of the scleral spur. So this again is a subjective assessment. If the scleral spur is not identified, your parameters will be wrong. Longitudinal assessment, again, you will be unsure whether you're always examining the same region which you examined earlier. So some amount of measurement variability is also likely to be there. So at the end, there is absolutely no debate between these three tools. Gonioscopy is still the gold standard. You absolutely have to do gonioscopy in all your glaucoma suspects and glaucoma cases. Imaging is definitely a great adjunct, with UBM having the greatest anatomical range of information, but there's absolutely no substitute for gonioscopy. Thank you.
Very good lecture, Purvi.
Thank you, madam. So with that, now we move on to the posterior segment imaging. And for this, I'd like to invite Dr. Gunjan Valu for her presentation on disc assessment, clinician-based or technician-based. Dr. Gunjan is a faculty assistant professor at the MNG RIO at Ahmedabad.
Is my screen visible?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, yes, perfect.
So after all anterior segment thing like gonioscopy, AS, OCT and UBM, now we come to the very important thing which we should be evaluating in glaucoma is a optic disc examination. So it helps us for diagnosis as well as it helps us in deciding the management plan of our patient, and we can monitor the progression of glaucoma with thorough careful disc evaluation. So there are various methods to evaluate the disc clinically is by qualitative assessment, that is by direct and indirect ophthalmoscopy, slit lamp biomicroscopy using various lenses, and by fundus photography. While the technical or quantitative assessment includes OCT, HRT, and GDX. In short, the 5 rules for evaluation of optic disc for glaucoma diagnosis. So if you check for these 5 things, you will usually not miss the glaucomatous disc. One is the scleral ring. So you have to identify scleral ring properly so that you can assess the optic nerve, optic disc size and optic nerve head size. The second is a detection of neuroretinal rim. So you have to carefully evaluate the neuroretinal rim, its color and its appearance, whether there is localized notching is there or any pallor or any defect in the neuroretinal rim. The very important thing to evaluate to catch the early glaucomatous defect is to find the retinal nerve fiber layer defect, which can usually be seen by indirect ophthalmoscopy. So it is a wedge-shaped defect, and if you do fundus photography with a red-ray filter, it can be easily picked up. But these things are usually missed in a busy OPD practices. Again, for evaluation or for checking the progression, we have to check for peripapillary atrophy. Enlargement of zone beta should be carefully evaluated, and observation of retinal and optic disc hemorrhages. So presence of any one hemorrhage near the disc margin should arouse suspicion, and we should check for progression. And it is usually seen in normal tension glaucoma patient. Regarding the disc size, there are various sizes of discs. So there is a large disc with large cup. It is an average size disc with a normal cup, and there may be small disc with no cupping. So all these discs should be evaluated carefully, and we should be checking for vertical and horizontal CD ratio. Vertical is more important for glaucoma patient. When we want to find out glaucoma suspect or we want to go for early diagnosis, we should always be checking the Easant rule, that Easant rule if it is followed or not, and we should always be checking for retinal nerve fiber layer defect. And exploration of focal or diffuse RNFL defect if it is possible with IO. If not possible, then do fundus photo and red-ray filter, and you can easily pick up these defects. But the drawback of clinical evaluation is we cannot quantify all parameters like disc size, optic cup size, nerve rim dimensions, and cup disc ratios. These all cannot be quantified with clinical observation. It is highly variable and observer dependent. Even same observer, if sees disc 2 or more times, there can be variations also. So intra and inter observer variations are also there during clinical examination. Subtle RNFL defects, which may be missed during busy OPD practices, and if not carefully seen, usually if it is there, we miss them. It can be detected by fundus photo, red-ray fundus photo, and we cannot detect pre-perimetric glaucoma by clinically evaluating the disc. So here OCT comes to our help. It is a non-invasive, non-contact, real-time and high-resolution imaging. And usually glaucoma OCT is done for retinal nerve fiber layer analysis, optic nerve head analysis, and nowadays ganglion cell complex analysis is also done. So retinal nerve fiber analysis is done here. The retinal nerve fiber, it shows typical bifid curve. Here the hotter area represents the normal RNFL thickness, and this black part shows artifact. Whenever checking for OCT, you always have to see for the signal strength. And this retinal nerve fiber layer analysis is then demonstrated in T-SNEAD curve, that is temporal, superior, nasal, inferior, and again temporal. And if this curve falls in this green zone, it indicates a normal RNFL thickness. If it comes to yellow, it is borderline, and if it is in red, it indicates thin retinal nerve fiber layers. Here also we can have an average retinal nerve fiber layer thickness and RNFL asymmetry. Asymmetry between two eyes is also considered as a significant defect in glaucoma. Again, RNFL can be thickness can be they also demonstrate on quadratic defects as well as clock-arch defect. So here we can also evaluate the parameters accordingly. And in optic nerve head analysis, we can have various parameters like rim area, disc area, average cup disc ratio, vertical cup disc ratio, and cup volume. So all this cannot be quantified during clinical evaluation. And when we check for progression, these all parameters help us for the progression also. And we can detect early glaucoma from this. And here the same is the yellow, green is a normal, yellow is borderline, and red is defective. Nowadays, various studies have suggested that early glaucomatous damage can involve central vision. So here we analyze the ganglion cell layer and inner plexiform layer. They are as sensitive as retinal nerve fiber analysis in detecting early glaucoma. So here the red part represents the normal ganglion cell thickness, and anything hotter color represents normal thickness. In here, yellow represents the normal thickness. But these analysis has limitations because patients with macular pathology and any vitreoretinal traction, these reports are not reliable, and only updated versions have these analysis complexes. So the advantage of OCT, it is easily reproducible. We can have quantitative measurement of optic nerve head, retinal nerve fiber layer, as well as ganglion cell complexes. We can have a baseline data. So they say that in OCT, a patient works as his own normal. So if you have done OCT today and if you are doing after 6 months, years and regular follow-up, then patient's data will be his baseline. So we can check, we can monitor the progression over the years with the same OCT machine. We can distinguish the optic nerve, optic glaucomatous damage from non-glaucomatous damage or any other optic neuropathies with use of OCT. We can detect pre-perimetric glaucoma, which cannot be detected by clinical evaluation. The OCT gives us cross-sectional analysis of optic disc, which is comparable to the histopathological section of the optic disc. And the progression software is a good adjunct for eyes with diffuse RNFL defects or unidentifiable RNFL software. But OCT has its own limitations. It has a narrow range of normative databases. So if you see the patients with optic disc anomaly, here it is having optic disc feet, or patients with pathological myopia, here the OCT is not helpful. Here we can have to evaluate clinically, as this is a normal, this rim seems healthy and there is a defect in the neuroretinal rim here. So by careful clinical evaluation, we can identify glaucomatous damage from clinically, not by OCT. And in the disc which are very large or very small, and in patients less than 18 years of age, OCT has limited normative database and we cannot conclude from OCT. Also, OCT in normative database, the ethnicity of subjects are also not diverse. So usually they take 95 micron as a normal thickness, but in this study, they demonstrated that 95 micron approximately is normal in Chinese participants, but the Indian participants usually have approximately 87 microns of thickness. So there may be fallacies in report of this. The same way, it is not useful in checking progression of advanced glaucoma because of the floor effect. Once the retinal nerve fiber layer thickness reaches 40 to 50 micron, it doesn't go beyond that because of the glial tissues and vessels. So in advanced glaucoma, it will never come to 0 micron. So for that patient, for this, we have to do clinical evaluation as well as perimetry to check for progression. The other fallacies are green disease and red disease. In green disease, OCT is normal, or all parameters are normal, like in green, but patient still has glaucoma. Here, the subtle RNFL defect may be missed out, and it falls in normative database. So machine shows the green parameters. And in red disease, it is a false positive OCT, and it can lead to a wrong diagnosis. Also, scans between different OCT instrument cannot be used for comparison. So if you have a patient has other one OCT printout and it comes to you and you have a different machine, you cannot compare the same parameters. It should be done in a same OCT machine. The same thing is for progression also. So if you have to check for progression, it should be done with the same machine. Otherwise, the parameters cannot be compared. The OCT scans are also affected by various artifacts like vitreous opacities, which can obscure the scan circles, media opacities, which can reduce the signal strength. And if the signal strength is not proper, your whole analysis is not proper. Then if there is vitropapillary traction or peripapillary atrophy, these can alter the retinal nerve fiber layer thickness. And this can mimic the glaucomatous thinning. And of course, cost is a major issue. So take-home points are stereoscopic fundus examination is must, followed by recording or drawing of disc findings. And fundus photo should be done normal and red-free to check for RNFL and for record purpose. And OCT should be evaluated carefully for signal strength, myopic eyes, and artifacts. In case of progression, check for cataract or PCO. So OCT is complementary to clinical evaluation, but not a substitute. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gunjan, for elaborating the limitations of OCT. And we have Dr. Parul now on the other hand, because we are also fond of RNFL imaging and the disc topography. So we would like to hear from you, Dr. Parul. What is your take on posterior segment or RNFL imaging? Is it the GDX or the OCT or neither of them? And Dr. Parul, to introduce, while you share your screen, I'll just introduce you. Dr. Parul is also an alumni of AIIMS and has been a research associated there for quite some time. And she is also a fellow of the University of Pittsburgh and now a director of her own institute, the Complete Eye Care and Gurgaon Glaucoma Center at Gurgaon. You need to unmute Dr. Parul.
Thank you, Dr.
Yeah.
Purvi, and thank you, Gunjan. She has made my job much easier. Now, after we have heard about the anterior segment imaging, and now we have gone to the posterior segment imaging, I will be talking about that which machine do we prefer, either it's a GDX or the OCT for evaluation of glaucoma patients. So we know that the diagnosis of glaucoma has multiple facets and we have to do the gonioscopy, the pressure assessment, and still the gold standard remains a very careful assessment of the optic nerve head and the nerve fiber layer defects, and perimetry is still the gold standard for diagnosis of our glaucoma patients in majority of cases. But whenever we talk about the picking up glaucoma cases at asymptomatic stages, imaging modalities have actually added a new dimension to glaucoma management. And now we can visualize the optic nerve head, the nerve fiber layer, and the ganglion cell complex using these machines. Now, coming back to the topic, what is the dilemma, whether we should go in for the GDX or OCT? And my question would be that, is there a dilemma? I think it's a very clear-cut choice that OCT definitely scores over GDX, and I'll be quickly running through why I would prefer an OCT over a GDX. Now, first, let's talk about the basics. As we know that OCT is based on Michelson interferometer, and it gives us a beautiful two-dimensional picture of the retina, which resembles the histological section very closely. And the machine has evolved tremendously in past few decades. So we have the time domain OCT, from which we have now OCT angio and the spectral domain and a swept source OCT, which gives us beautiful three-dimensional picture of the retina. Though, as Gunjan very clearly, Dr. Gunjan mentioned that you have to be careful that data of one OCT machine should not be compared with the data of another machine, and you should follow up the patient on the same kind of OCT machine that you have. Now, moving on to the GDX. Now, GDX is a scanning laser polarimeter. What it does, it measures the retardation caused by the retinal nerve fiber layer, which is a birefringent structure, and that is how it measures the nerve fiber layer thickness. Now, the GDX machine has again, it hasn't seen too many evolutions. We had first the GDX machine, and then we had the GDX VCC, and now we have the GDX ECC machine. The advantage of OCT over GDX is that a single machine can help us to evaluate a lot of structures in the eye, the nerve fiber layer, the optic nerve head. We can see the macula, we can see the ganglion cell complex. Also with the anterior segment OCT, you can evaluate the central corneal thickness, you can look at the angles, and also the bleb morphology in the postoperative period. Now, the nerve fiber layer thickness is measured in a circle which is 1.73 millimeters around the optic nerve head, and this is how the optic nerve head tomography calculations are done with the OCT. Now, as Dr. Gunjan mentioned, that the OCT printouts are beautifully color-coded. They are very easy to read and interpret. Whatever is in green is considered as normal. The red means abnormal, and the yellow tagged parameters means they are borderline. The important improvement in the OCT is the introduction of the ganglion cell complex measurement, which can tell you about the earliest loss in the glaucoma patients. And some studies have shown that GCC measurements are sometimes superior to the nerve fiber layer measurements in certain subset of patients. Otherwise, they are quite informative whenever we want to pick up the early glaucoma loss. Now, when we look at the GDX machine, this is how a GDX printout looks like. So again, you have to look at the scan quality. What is the signal strength like? You can assess the fundus image. You can have the thickness maps, which are pseudo color coded. The red means a thicker nerve fiber layer. A blue area means the loss of the nerve fiber layer. A yellow means the blue area means the thinner, and the lower the colors are, the yellower means a little lesser thickness in the nerve fiber layer. The other important area is the deviation map, which again is color coded. Now in this, the red means the nerve fiber layer loss. So in the thickness map, red means a thicker nerve fiber layer. In the deviation map, the red color means the nerve fiber layer loss. And again, you can have beautiful Tisnet curves, which gives you the comparison of both eyes along with the overlay on the normative database. The most important parameter that the GDX machine gives us is the nerve fiber indicator, which basically tells you about the focal and the diffuse nerve fiber layer loss. And if the nerve fiber indicator is more than 50 in number, it means the patient has a very thin nerve fiber layer and could be because of glaucoma. Now, when we talk about progression, both these machines can tell you about progression. OCT, you can do a sequential analysis of the nerve fiber layer thickness, and it can tell you if the graph is growing down or if the colors are changing, the glaucoma is progressing. And similarly on GDX, you can have a progression analysis. But we have to remember that to err is human, and machines are also not perfect. So there is a beautiful article which has been published by Dr. Sanjay Asrani, which talks about the artifacts in glaucoma. And whenever we are using these machines, we have to be careful. And as Dr. Gunjan very clearly mentioned, that there are a lot of artifacts which one can encounter in the OCT scans, and almost 1/3 of the OCT scans can have some or the other artifact, which we have to be careful about. Now, these artifacts could either be in form of a red disease, which means a misdiagnosis or a false positive, or it could be a green disease. That means the machine is labeling that patient as a false positive or a false glaucoma patient. Now, red disease means patient does not have glaucoma, but the OCT looks red on the printout. The causes could be many. It could be an improperly acquired scan or coexisting anatomical abnormalities. Just to give you a few examples, if the signal strength is not properly acquired, the segmentation algorithm fails. In such a case, when you have a scan like this, please go back, reacquire a scan, do a proper focus, and you can see an abnormal scan converting into normal with the improved signal strength. So this is very, very important. Signal strength is a very important parameter in all the OCT scans. Now, moving on to the optic nerve head parameters, again, signal strength is important. Just to give you an example, now this was a glaucoma suspect with these kind of optic nerve heads in both the side. We went ahead, ordered an OCT, and we found that the optic nerve head parameters on the left side were totally abnormal as compared to the right side. Again, what we found that because of the poor signal strength, the RP endpoints were not properly detected. So again, you reacquire a scan, do a proper charting, and then you can see that the nerve fiber layer parameters, optic nerve head parameters were similar on both the sides. The other acquisition related defects, as Dr. Gunjan mentioned, could be because of movement, decentration, blinking, in which you can lead to loss of data. Vitreous opacities can again lead to loss of data. Patients who are high myopes, in these patients, the OCT cannot perform very well and can give rise to segmentation defect. The segmentation algorithm fails and you can have a red OCT despite the fact that patient does not have glaucoma. Now, what is important that you should not be missing upon the green disease, which actually means that patient has early glaucoma, but the OCT is recorded as absolutely normal. Now, this could happen if patient has very tiny focal defects. Now, these are missed on the global parameters. So you have to be very careful, and clinical assessment cannot be ignored in such patients. Now, again, with the younger individuals, when you are suspecting glaucoma in individuals who are less than 18 years of age, the printouts that you get are not color-coded, and you have to be careful. Now, as mentioned earlier, floor effect is something that you have to be very careful about. And in advanced glaucoma patients, the OCT may not have much of a role because it cannot differentiate between a functional and a non-functional retinal nerve fiber layer. Now, moving on to the limitations of GDX. Now, GDX measures the anterior segment birefringence by obtaining a macular scan. So in patients who have macular pathology, you have to opt for another scanning modality. In patients who have large areas of peripapillary atrophy, again, you have to go in for a scan circle, which is larger in size. Now, the limitations of GDX VCC has been tried to overcome by incorporating the enhanced corneal compensator, which avoids the atypical retardation patterns. But again, there are a lot of studies in literature which have very, very clearly shown that OCT scores over GDX. Because what we can see with the OCT is a multitasker. A single machine can help you to evaluate glaucoma. It can help you to evaluate retina, the anterior segment. It is definitely cost effective for solo practitioners like me. And there are many, many models to choose from. And on the other hand, GDX is a dedicated glaucoma tool, though it measures the large area of retinal nerve fiber layer. But I think it is good for institutes which are doing a lot of research, or maybe government institution which can have 2 or 3 machines. If you want to have a single machine, OCT is the way to go about it. But at the end, I would like to say, whichever machine you acquire, whether it's a OCT or a GDX, choose carefully, follow up the patient on the same machine. Do not make any decisions solely based on imaging. Put every piece of information together to solve the jigsaw of glaucoma. And I would like to end with a statement by Dr. Lexell, who was a famous neurosurgeon, who said, "A fool with a tool is still a fool." So therefore, whenever you acquire a machine, learn how to use it, be aware of its shortcomings, and please do not leave the clinical acumen aside. Thank you for your patience here.
Thank you, Dr. Parul. That was very concise, but a complete comparison of the two tools. With this, we come to the end of the presentations, but we'll carry on with some discussions and take-home pearls for our attending delegates. Since Dr. Parul, you just completed, I'll ask you first that you have mentioned about OCT and GDX, but where does HRT now stand? Does it still have a place? Because many people have actually invested in an HRT also, and they've been very fond of the progression analysis software that it has.
Dr. Purvi, I agree, and I always remember my RPC days whenever we talk about the HRT and the GDX, because, that was the time that we used to have access to all the 3 machines, and we used to image every single patient on all the 3 machines to see how the machines are doing, which one is performing better. But looking at, the current scenario, I would still stay on my statement that given a choice, if you want to acquire one machine, OCT is the choice. If you have HRT, you can still use it, but acquiring a new machine, OCT will definitely score over any of these imaging machines.
Okay. Dr. Mayuri Madam, you have also used GDX a lot. So what is your take?
Yes.
Yeah.
I was a big fan of GDX, and Purvi, it was giving excellent result. Unless there is a myopic eye or a tilted disc, there was an issue. But with the OCT coming in, now shifted to OCT and no more GDX.
Okay.
Because a lot of new softwares are, the company itself is not interested in promoting GDX. They do not want to transfer one data of one GDX to the advanced version of the GDX. So all the data are lost. That's the biggest disadvantage of these machines. Whichever machine you buy, the old data cannot be put to the new machine.
That is the biggest actually disadvantage of any software-based technology.
And Dr. Purvi, I would like to add upon, like OCT, as I was mentioning, there are so many competitors, if the polarimeter would have been the choice, why we have only GDX? We could have so many companies making such machines, so that itself gives you the answer,
True, true. We have talked a lot of quantification. So of course the disc quantification and all those measurements, they are very easily possible with the imaging techniques. But Dr. Gunjan, what if somebody does not have an imaging device with them and they want to measure the disc, or, because a large size disc and a small size disc, they are very, very important when we talk of the CD ratio. 0.5 CD ratio in a large myopic disc is insignificant, but a 0.5 CD ratio in a small hypermetropic discs make a lot of significance. So clinically, how would you suggest that somebody or even a general ophthalmologist who does not have access to imaging, how would they measure or grade the discs into small, average, or large?
So majority of us will be having any of the condensing lens like 90 diopter or 78 diopter or 60 diopter lens in our clinic. So if we are doing it with slit lamp biomicroscopy, you focus the disc with the condensing lens, and then you adjust the vertical height or horizontal height of the slit beam, which is comparable to the disc size. And whatever the millimeters or parameter you measure, you just multiply with the correcting power. So if the lens diameter is 60, then the correcting power is 1. If the lens diameter is 78, the correcting power is 1.11. And if the condensing lens is plus 90 diopter, the correcting power is 1.33. So this is how you can measure the exact disc size. So if you don't have these, or you are just using direct ophthalmoscope, in one Welch-Allyn direct ophthalmoscope method, if there is a 5-degree aperture. So you focus that aperture on a disc. So if your disc is smaller than that, it means you have a small disc. And if your disc falls approximately 1.5 diameter away or bigger than that, it means it is a large disc. So if you don't have that one, the other thing is that you can just check the temporal disc margin and fovea distance. So if temporal disc margin and fovea, if it is approximately 2 disc diameter, then it is a normal size disc. If you feel that the temporal disc margin and foveal distance is less than 2 disc size, it means it is a large disc. So this is how we can calculate the disc size.
Okay, thanks for that. I'd like to ask Dr. Talvir, you have your gonio photographs and everything, that's great. So now that we have advised everybody to go for clinical evaluation and gonioscopy is a must, what lens would you advise a beginner to buy or invest in? Because we have been talking of investing in, ophthalmoscopes and gonio lenses. So what lens would anybody buy if they want to start practicing gonio? You need to unmute yourself.
Am I audible, ma'am?
Yeah. Yes.
Yes. So once we start doing gonioscopy, we have 2 types of lenses. We have the Goldman type lenses and the Sussman or Posner type lenses. The Goldman type lenses, they are the lenses where we need coupling fluid. And because the well of the lens is bigger than that of the cornea, but in the Posner type lenses, we do not need the coupling fluid. So here, once we start doing gonioscopy, it is not about the what kind of lens, actually any type of lens one can buy and start doing gonioscopy, but people find it easier, especially when they're using a viscoelastic material as a coupling fluid. Usually the junior residents who start doing gonioscopy feel very comfortable because they're able to stabilize the lens over the eye. And in most of the institutes, I guess, in the government colleges, we have Goldman type lenses in the inventory. So the JRs usually start doing with that. And once you buy your own gonioscope and you have gone up the ladder and you have surpassed the learning curve, then I guess the 4 mirror becomes very comfortable for you also and the patient, because you just put 1 drop of paraffin and can place the gonioscope over the eye, and the angle can be viewed immediately.
Dr. Neha, moving on with that question, we have done we have bought the gonio lens, we have done a first gonioscopy. Now, if suppose the angles are well opened and you have classified the patient as having wide open angles and POAG, how frequently would you repeat gonioscopy in an open angle case? Or suppose post PI, the angles have opened well enough
So,
and
ma'am,
now all is fine. Then when would you
Yeah.
repeat the gonioscopy?
So, yeah. So basically, I'm looking at a person who is like an aged person, and I think the lens thickness is going to increase with age. I would like to repeat it annually. If it is a young person, maybe I can do it once in 2 years or as he crosses the age of 40.
Okay. Dr. Mayuri madam, your take on this, how frequently do you repeat a gonio in an open angle glaucoma case and in a case of angle closure?
Open angle glaucoma, I don't repeat it at least for 2-3 years. No, unless you see the shallowing of the chamber. I don't repeat it that often, but in angle closure glaucoma, yearly I do repeat, and after PI, it has to be repeated. And one more thing is after surgery, cataract surgery, for example, then also I do repeat the gonio, because then sometimes the visibility of goniosynechia and the patchy pigmentation is more. So there I do repeat it.
Dr. Parul, since you do a lot of OCT, what would you say would be the role of OCT in angle closure glaucoma? Primary angle, you are muted.
Dr. Purvi, I don't have the, dedicated anterior segment OCT, and what I use is the corneal attachment and the anterior segment attachment to measure
We're talking of posterior segment OCT.
No, so you're talking about the angle, or you're talking about?
No, the disc. The disc
Okay.
and RNFL in angle closure glaucoma cases.
No, so angle closure glaucoma cases, sometimes what can happen if the disc is smaller in size and the nerve fiber, so for each patient, you have to be very, very careful for a clinical, as I was talking about the green disease, many times you can miss a small subtle focal defect. So it is very important that you see all these angle closure glaucoma patients for a small focal loss very carefully, because these changes can sometimes be missed on a small disc. And that is why a serial follow-up, and even if the patient is persistent to show a nerve fiber layer thickness which is in green but maybe showing a slight decrease, you have to be assessing them very carefully.
Dr. Talveer, suppose anybody doesn't have any imaging technique, then how would you diagnose a case of plateau iris or pseudo plateau iris on gonioscopy? How do you suspect a plateau iris case?
There is a sine wave sign that can be visualized when indentation is done on gonioscopy. So usually, actually, plateau iris is diagnosed after YAG-PI. Once you've done a YAG-PI and the angle is still closed, it is not opening. Once you do indentation, then after indentation, you can see that there is a iris is actually bowing down in the middle between the angle and in the mid peripheral area. So that is a sine wave sign, and that is how it can be diagnosed.
Yeah. And Dr. Gunjan, how frequently would you repeat a disc assessment? Is it on every visit or every few visits, both for open angle glaucoma cases and for angle closure?
We usually like to evaluate disc if a patient is one-eyed, then preferably at 3 months. And if not high risk and moderate glaucoma, we like to evaluate disc at 6 months or a yearly follow-up.
Any other differences from any of the panelists?
I do the
Mayuri
dilated
madam,
disc
yeah.
examination yearly, because the rest of the retina also I would like to see. So repetition of the dilated disc examination. Otherwise, whenever patient comes for the follow-up, it is my routine to use 90D to see the central fundus undilated.
Though this has not been a part of our session actually, but perimetry plays a very vital role in the diagnostic armamentarium. So I'd just like a quick take on what is your take on white-on-white perimetry and the role of any of the newer perimeters for diagnosis of glaucoma. We can begin with Dr. Talveer. Perimetry on the diagnostic ladder.
Ma'am, Definitely, perimetry is gold standard in looking at the visual fields is very necessary while we are diagnosing glaucoma. Because of the very typical glaucomatous visual field defects that are there nowadays. Actually, the important thing that is coming up is like the newer 24-2C pattern that has come on Humphrey visual fields, which also assesses people who have smaller RNFL defects which are closer to the fixation, which cannot be actually picked up by the standard 30-2 or 24-2 because of the wide spaced 6-degree widely spaced points. But the 10-2, which has been added on to the 24-2 and 24-2C pattern, that can pick up those smaller RNFL defects. The visual field defect due to the smaller RNFL defects close to the fixation, ma'am.
Dr. Neha, your take on perimetry? I think she's locked off.
She's traveling.
Neha was facing some technical issues and internet connection glitches also, so she, I guess, locked out because of that. We can continue.
Dr. Parul, yeah.
Dr. Purvi, see, my take would be that first of all, we have this white on white perimetry, and then we have the other machines like the FDT, which I don't think is very popular anymore. And then we have these blue on yellow. So amongst all these, the white on white perimetry is still the gold standard, and that is what I do. But recently we have these newer perimetry devices, which are like MRF, which a small portable thing, which I am really looking forward to trying to use them to, how do we incorporate these devices in our practice. Last AIOS, I just had, I attended 1 or 2 symposiums in which we talked about the MRF, but I don't have any personal experience about these. But this is something which will be much faster and much quicker and easier for the patients to use. So I really want to try these.
Portable perimeters are now coming up.
Yes.
Yeah. Dr. Gunjan? Yeah. Your take on perimetry on the diagnostic ladder?
Perimetry, usually we can detect at an early stage than clinical disc evaluation, because they say that 30% damage is already there when it comes to perimetry, but still perimetry is gold standard, and it can help us in diagnosis early as well as to check the progression also.
Dr. Mayur, madam, final word from you?
No, on the final, you can.
On perimetry.
Nobody can substitute at this level perimetry. It is must and has to be done for all the patients. But lately I have started using 10-2 for early cases of glaucoma where I am suspecting or ocular hypertensive. There I use it a lot, and no roll of swap or that I have stopped using. In the old machine of Humphrey, there was a customized program. You can just put the dots where you are suspecting and elicit many more points, but those are not available now with the new machine.
SWAP, actually, it is said theoretically that it detects the pre-perimetric glaucoma, but it is practically very, very difficult to perform.
Yes.
All those who are actually advising SWAP or blue and yellow should in fact get themselves a SWAP done.
I have it, and it was so difficult to face.
I got it done.
To perceive that stimulus on a yellow background, and it is so fuzzy and so difficult, it actually puts a lot of effort. So as of now, I think we should just go with the white and white perimeter, yeah. And the 10-2, of course, has a role not only in cases of advanced glaucoma when you want to see the split fixation, but now also in cases of early diagnosis.
All right. With that, may I request Dr. Purvi to please
Yes.
comment up in next 1 minute?
Yeah. So that was anyways my concluding comment. So with that, we come to the end of the session, and I thank my faculty for their brilliant talks and interaction, and also the delegates who are attending right now, and Mr. Prasad and the IT team as well.
Thank you, Puri, for giving.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
A big thank you to our chairperson and all the speakers also for completing the session on time, so we can hand it over the session to our next speakers on
Thank you,
time.
everyone. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you all.
Thank you.